Welcome to Fun with Photos. In this class, we will help you to make your photos look better and to have more fun with your photography. Presented to you by the Esther DeWitt Nixon Library Branch of the Central Arkansas Library System. If you want to improve your photography, start with the composition of the photo, not the camera gear you use to take it. I think composition is one of the most important things about photography, and sometimes it's overlooked because everybody's looking for the greatest new camera they can buy. No matter what camera you buy, if you don't use it correctly, it's not going to give you the photo you want. In the composition of your photo, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the focal point. The focal point is what draws your attention first in the photo, what gets your attention, what sucks you into the photo and makes it interesting. In this photo, the focal point is the eye, not of a person, because this actually isn't a person, it's a mannequin head. But that's the thing that draws your attention, and that's the thing you should focus on, and it should be the sharpest thing in your photo. Now that you know about the focal point, you need to know how to focus the camera on that point. If your camera can reliably pick the correct focus point automatically, then you can do that. If not, on a cell phone you can usually set the camera to enable tapping the focus point on the screen. With a camera, one method is to put the focusing square on the focal point, half press the shutter button and hold it. Then move the camera to recompose the frame the way you want it, and continue pressing the shutter to take the photo. On some cameras, you can also move the focus point using a button or joystick. In this photo, it shows the viewfinder of a particular camera where they have chosen the tree as the focal point and move the focal point to that tree. Now we will talk about a compositional rule called the rule of thirds. Using the rule of thirds, you divide the photo equally with two horizontal lines and two vertical lines. Where those lines meet, the intersection of those lines, is where you should put your focal point. It isn't necessary to put your focal point exactly where the intersection of the lines are. Somewhere close is usually pretty good. This one is a little bit to the right and a little bit above where the lines would meet, but it still gives you a very nice composition where it's not perfectly centered. The main focal point of this photo is the parking lot that's lit up. There's also a secondary focal point that would be top right, that would be Pinnacle Mountain off in the distance, but the illuminated area is much brighter and stands out much more. Now that I've taught you about the rule of thirds, I'm going to teach you how to break it. You don't always have to follow the rule. There's some times where a photo looks more interesting if you do something else. In this photo, the focal point is right in the middle of the photo. In this case, it still looks interesting because we have all kinds of interesting lines and shadows and textures. Here again, the focal point is right in the middle, but we have some lines leaning towards it from each side. Plus, the spinning blades of this blender provide some interest in the focal point. Next, I'll be talking about leading lines and diagonal lines. These are things you can use to make your photo more interesting. Here's a photo by well-known professional photographer Joe McNally. Notice how the edges of the bar and the edges of the foot rail on the bottom lead towards the subject, the saxophone player. You can also see the rays of light that are shining towards him and focusing on him and bringing attention to him. These lines actually draw your eye into the photo towards the subject. Also, since they are diagonal lines, not going directly across or directly up and down, they tend to have a little more interest in the photo. The edge of this airplane wing provides the diagonal and leading lines in this photo, directing your attention to the tip of the wing, which is the focal point. One thing you should try and avoid doing in a photo is having those lines going directly into the corner of the photo. It's okay if it misses the corner and it comes close, but don't go directly into the corner, because sometimes if you do that, it can actually direct your attention out of the photo instead of into it where it should go. Turning the camera slightly so the canoe is going across the photo at an angle adds some interest to this photo. Also, the bright oars make a nice focal point. The raindrops hitting the water also adds some texture to the background that makes it more interesting. I like to use shadows in my photos to make them more interesting also. Here I kept it at an angle and made sure that the end of it did not go into the corner. Converting this photo from color to black and white also made it stand out much more and add more contrast. Framing is where you use other objects in your photo to accent the subject of the photo. In this photo, I used the red crane as a frame around the subject, the boat, coming into the harbor. The boat was moving, and I waited until it was in the spot that I wanted under the crane. Here, the moon is framed by the clouds, by the opening in the clouds, and also a more subtle framing by the branches of the tree. I also followed the rule of thirds here. Usually the framing shouldn't stand out more than the subject, as you see here, although sometimes it works if you do something else, like in the previous photo of the crane and the boat. In composing a good photo, the background can be at least as important as the subject. It shouldn't be distracting. It should have a nice backdrop for the subject. It can add some interest of its own, or it could just be completely blank. The flower in this photo is the subject. It stands out because of its color, because it's sharp and focused. And in the background, we still have some diagonal lines that still add some interest without being distracting. It's also darker, and it's out of focus, deliberately out of focus so it doesn't draw attention to itself. This photo has some otherwise nice composition, but it does have a few flaws. If you look to the right, you see the red sign. That's kind of distracting. It would probably be better if you used Photoshop to eliminate that sign, to erase it, or if you crop the right edge of the photo off a little bit. This background is clean and uncluttered. The airplanes are in the rule of thirds spot in the photo. You don't always have to have diagonal lines going across a photo to be interesting. Here are these lines from the plane, the smoke coming from the back of the plane, are horizontal, but it still adds some interest to the photo. The edge of the clouds behind the plane also lightly frame the airplanes. and the airplanes being darker than the rest of the photo and having contrast with the rest make them stand out. The background here is completely black and in the dark, with lights only on the flowers. So they stand out from the background. Nothing in the background draws your attention away from the flowers. The flower on the right is in focus, and the flower on the left is deliberately out of focus so it doesn't draw as much attention but still has accent to the other flower. Perspective is another consideration when composing a photo. Where the camera is shooting from can completely change the look of a photo. Most photos are taken at eye level, giving the same perspective everyone else would see. But if you want something different, you could hold the camera higher or lower, as in this photo. You can also get closer to your subject to show more detail and eliminate distractions around it. Also try shooting from different angles. At first, this might also look similar to a flower, but it's actually a canvas canopy with lights underneath it at a park. It was shot at an angle to make the perspective more interesting. Then as I was editing the photo, I noticed what it could look like turned upside down. This is another example of changing the perspective by turning the photo, in this case 90 degrees to the right. The focal point is the green square, which doesn't quite follow the rule of thirds, but it looked best to me in this position. For some photos, when you take the photo or the timing of it can be a very important part of the composition. When you have a subject that is moving, there can be what is commonly referred to as the decisive moment, where everything in the photo is in the position you want. Because each of the airplanes was going 500 miles an hour, getting this photo at the right time was very difficult. It took several attempts and numerous photos to get this one shot. For this photo, I had more time to get the shot. It was composed with the leading lines of the street where I wanted them, then waiting for a bicycle to get into the position that I wanted for the photo. The man walking is the main subject, and I wanted him in that spot between the poles. For a walking subject, I also try to take the photo when their legs are apart like this to emphasize his motion. The car being in just the right spot was an unexpected bonus. Now I would like to give you some other tips on how to improve your photos. The first is to try and hold your camera as steady as possible. If you can, keep your arms close to or touching your body and use two hands. If your arms are extended out, it's much harder to hold the camera steady. Here's an example of what could happen if you don't hold the camera still enough. There are also situations where you just need to use a tripod to get good results. Another tip is to try and capture the 3 E's in your photos: energy, emotion, and excitement. If you do, it can make your photos come alive. Energy, excitement, emotion. Be creative. Explore new techniques and ideas. Unusual perspectives. One of my favorites, using reflections. Slow shutter speeds. Thank you for watching Fun with Photos. If you would like to see more photography classes here, please leave a comment below. Goodbye.